Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new segment on the Say Again podcast. Abhishek Kumar, you're joining us in our very own living room. A little mascot here is Ruby, who's out of frame, but she's welcome to join us as well. You know, we've done now 48 to 49 episodes of this podcast.
Closing in on 50,
Yes.
half century, yes.
Which is pretty incredible. Some of the topics that come up a lot, which people seem to be very interested in, have to do with AI, of course. Specifically GenAI. I've been talking to people about these predictions that artificial general intelligence will hit by 2030. GPT-5 just released. And I know these are all topics that you're following very closely. I want to ask you what you make of, and you can, of course, source and attribute, where you're getting your information from if you like. Recent warnings, it's Geoffrey Hinton, isn't it? The inventor of AI, who's still saying that we need to be worried, that humans should be worried about that moment when AI becomes more intelligent than us. That would be the singularity or the super intelligence. And he was an Anderson Cooper, I think, saying that the only way to combat this might be to inculcate a maternal instinct in AI, because so far the only example we have of less intelligent beings or having some control over more intelligent beings is babies and mothers. What do you make of all of this? And what are people actually saying listening to this?
I think I'll probably agree and disagree with parts of those arguments or some of those arguments because I think the fear that we saw or we heard of maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago when this all broke out with ChatGPT, I think those have to a certain extent been tempered now because you see the exact pace of growth and both with the ability of models to improve. I think there's been some debate over how good the newer versions are of different models. But more importantly, I think it is certainly the most transformational technology of our lifetimes. And I think of a couple of lifetimes. I think whether it was automation or computers after that, I think none of those technologies have had the power to transform our lives, both professional and personal, like AI has. That said, its applicability to everyday life is up in the air. It's debatable, right? For example, in certain areas, it is certainly going to wipe out a large chunk of jobs. The number of people employed will be much less. For example, like coding and certain fields where I think the sum of its output can be defined very, very precisely and can be measured very precisely. On the other hand, I think the worry stems from, and I wouldn't go as far as, I'm not an expert on AGI, but I would say that what we see with all technologies, especially in the last 3 decades or 4 decades, is the ability of technologies to exacerbate prevailing social issues, right? Or personal issues or mental health issues. And whether it was gaming earlier or chats, those messenger services, people have this tendency to then spiral into their own pre-existing issues or spiral on the basis of pre-existing issues. With AI, that's like on steroids, right? It's super fast. The impact is very pronounced and rapid. So I think that's where we have to worry. I was having with someone from the medical field, and we're very excited about the fact that in certain segments of medicine, the performance of LLMs has improved drastically in the last 2 years, and they are both shocked and impressed by the pace at which these LLMs are able to get into fields which we earlier would never have thought of, like diagnosis, radiology, etc. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I can't vouch for that, but they are seeing rapid improvements and they are very impressed, but also worried that we have this tendency, whether we are millennials or whether we are are Gen Xers, or that I would say the generation that has been exposed to internet from a young age. Our tendency is, for example, if we are feeling unwell, the first thing we did even 5 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, was to open Google and search our symptoms, right? But it usually stopped at just before, we would assume a solid diagnosis and start taking steps. We would then have a mindset that, okay, I'm suffering from this, but I would still go to a doctor or, seek medical help. What's happening now is with generative AI is that there is a technology that can actually talk back to us, as in it can both reinforce our beliefs, assumptions, which is very worrying when it comes to things like physical health, mental health. That's where the doom loop is fatal, right? It will just reinforce your perceptions and your assumptions about your own.
Your biases, it could be a cognitive distortion.
Those are still, I would say, I'm talking purely in terms of physical. So, for example, health issues. How do you stop anyone from letting a model or a chatbot diagnose your disease for you basis symptoms that you have fed in? Or so, for example, I can feed my blood tests, blood work on any of these AI chatbots, and it gives me a response. Because the issue there is that it is bound to give a response.
I think the challenge here, though, is that a lot of people are using it like this. And I'm just going to say that the challenge is we don't know what's happening to your data. That's one. When we're talking about everybody using it to translate their health, it's obviously democratizing access to information, and that's really what it's there for, right? The challenges with cognitive distortions, the challenges with mental health, as you know, we've been talking to some of these senior psychiatrists saying that it's dangerous. It can actively be dangerous to use an LLM as your supposed therapist. We know that till the last model, there was a sycophantic streak. So it was reinforcing so coming back to what you're saying, you might have put in your symptoms and you might have also have certain thoughts about what's going on with your health.
Yes.
It's likely to reinforce.
Certainly, I think now, I think the latest, which I think saw yesterday or day before, is, or read about it, is AI psychosis, which again is this vicious doom loop, whatever you call it, where if you have a pre-existing condition, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, and you get onto this services and then you look for answers, but look for answers in a way where you keep prompting it to give an answer which you like. Right? Now that, obviously, that doesn't work with therapists and with medical doctors, because they will give you a diagnosis basis facts and figures and your numbers, your tests, whatever it is, and their analysis. Not in this case. Now, so I think, as I said, I think all technologies have this risk that if used like this, they can result, the outcome will be the same. But in this case, the oversight is pretty vague right now.
This is a handful of companies, a handful of people sitting in Silicon Valley. It's not actually, there's no oversight.
I mean, it's because it is all new, right? When you say, okay, if I ask you what is AGI or super intelligence, for example.
So we was reading about
you don't
this.
know.
That's what we should actually be telling people. The reason we're doing this chat is also not that we are experts. We've been reading up and learning and trying to understand more. It is to demystify some of these terms, right? So we'll put up the definitions. But artificial general intelligence, which people are projecting by 2030, even given this latest thing of GPT, is, I think, basically when you say that AI is as intelligent as human intelligence. Yeah. And those are the tests that have been going on since the Turing tests, which all of you will have heard about. I think the challenge is the speed, and this is, I mean, coming back to an episode we linked to with Aki Ranin, which Abhishek, I know you saw as well, where he was talking about that speed, the speed at which things can go drastically wrong because we're not actually regulating. There aren't guardrails in place just yet. And these companies are not necessarily incentivized to have those. Right now, the move from all the companies is don't regulate us because it's become like a US versus China thing, right? So all of the Silicon Valley big tech companies are saying we should regulate, we should be innovating. This is in contrast to what you were saying, which was a year or two ago, where people were saying, let's be cautious, let's be cautious. At this point, I think the challenge is we don't know, as Abhishek said, what's going to happen with AGI. We don't know if and when AI will hit that sort of singularity and become more intelligent than humans, then what happens to humanity? And I think the people who are concerned about this are saying, why race headlong into this when there's so much potential for harm? And we're not even talking about bad faith actors yet, right, who can misuse this. And the other thing I want to bring to you is social media. And I was reading this Jonathan Haidt book on social media and the impact on mental health for young people. It's been like this huge, it's literally been a huge global experiment. We're still coming to terms with some of the pitfalls, some of the consequences of widespread social media use from a young age. So when it comes to this, and again, as someone who talks to a lot of startup founders, you're at that cutting edge of innovation also. A lot of people are interested in innovating within GenAI. What are some of the guardrails you think should be in place versus a country like India, an emerging market like India? How do we even get in the game? What are companies here thinking?
I personally am against jumping too far towards regulations. That has the potential of killing an industry very early, right? So I don't think regulation is a problem. I don't think intent is a problem. I don't think any of these companies are intend to do harm. They are racing because the technology is too fast, right? If you don't move fast, someone else will. The amount of capital required, resources required, is unlike any other technology or new innovation that we have seen in the last, say, 100 years.
Yeah.
Right? Because in everything else, I think every society or every country had an opportunity to catch up. What I feel different in this case is there is no catch up. Or you're rather always catching up, but you're never there. So yes, I think that the risk here is more about concentration of power in certain geographies versus the other technologies. Whether it was, for example, arms or, which was a big threat when it started, nuclear technology, weapons of mass destruction. There was, I think, enough time to clamp down, put in guardrails about proliferation. But in this case, it's not a visible threat. No physical form of this. Unlike any other technology. These are not physical AI in the form of robots and drones, which we're already seeing. But the technology behind it is almost invisible, right? It resides in data centers, and on chips. So it's hard to grasp. Yes, you can put in regulations, but the risk here is that whoever is too strict on regulations ends up losing the race. And I don't think, I think the benefit or the good to humanity of this technology is I think too high a cost to be bearing for the risks that we don't know yet, right? We know certain risks, we can regulate for those, but to regulate the entire industry or the technology, I think would be a bad move, because it will be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
That's so interesting. Because I do think if we don't know what the risks are, there is definitely a school of thought that says, like, wait, learn more, and then...
Yeah, absolutely. I think, wait and learn is always a good...
but it's not going to happen right now. Let's
But what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you sit and observe.
Yeah.
Right? You have to act, you have to develop, you have to invest. And yes, on the way, as the risks become visible or are obvious, you clamp down on the risks. Provide the guardrails, you provide the safeguards for vulnerable populations. But not at the cost of progress of this technology. I think every part of the world should be invested in this.
Yeah.
It can't. You can't have.
You can't
not have it, and you can't. Probably there are some parts of the world which will never have any lead in this.
The challenge is the inequities. That's what people are saying, right? Like the inequities are going to get worse. Much as we think that better tech can solve so many problems, and I know you and I both do believe that. The responsible use of that tech.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to refer to one of the episodes where we're talking about Aki Ranen's episode, which is a recent one, so I have a recency bias. Yeah. But as a two-time founder, as a deep tech AI investor, he's also talking about the fact that we are all, of course, using, as all of us who are privileged enough to use these LLMs, we're all using these LLMs constantly, right? Like we delegate a lot of tasks to them. I use it for some of the social media or marketing, whatever posts I think are helpful. He was saying, be careful of what you outsource to LLMs, because this GPS effect, which is that most of us don't now know anything about, as you know, I have no directions, but apparently I'm not alone. Most of us will use a Google Maps or whatever it is, because we've decided that these are tasks we no longer want to do. Yeah. With LLMs, I think the challenge is, and we're seeing that people are getting less and less coherent. I think this was the early days when you realize that, we're losing some coherence. Yeah. And the question I want to put to you, which I put to him, and also in a previous episode, which we'll link to, is that isn't there some merit to this process of striving to learn something? So, for example, in this act of trying to master what we can about AGI or Gen AI, in this quest to learn something, isn't there some merit to us learning from that failing, even writing a paper? So, for example, he was giving an example, Aki was giving an example of writing a blog. He's like, of course, I can get an LLM to write that blog for me. Yeah. But in that, I'm not producing anything, I'm consuming. Yeah. And I'm not learning anything.
I agree. And in fact, I would go a step ahead there. And I would say, we have to make a distinction between, when you mentioned the example of Google Maps or GPS, ever since GPSs came in, we've forgotten directions in our hometowns. So sometimes, we don't know where, unless we have the map in front of us.
I'm pretty impressed.
But I think you have to make a distinction between technologies and tools that make us more efficient
Yeah.
versus technologies that make us redundant or parts of our brain redundant. Because if you, for example, even as something as trivial as or as small or invisible as autocomplete,
Yes.
there have been studies that it has affected people's spelling abilities,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Is that good or bad for a child versus an adult? We have to make that distinction. That is an example. GPS is an example. But what did that do? What did GPS do? It made us more efficient. It made us get to from A to B faster than stopping 3 times on the way asking for directions. It did that also, along with making it so easy that we don't know the routes we used to know earlier.
And we don't even think
so there's
about
that balance we have to.
I think we don't even think about using it anymore,
Yeah,
right? We're
yeah.
not
So-
conscious of...
Yeah, so it's. I think I feel with the whole AI thick gushing pipe of change that is coming our way, I think what we have to realize is that it is making us a lot more efficient. The risk with anything that makes us more efficient is that it also over time makes us useless or inconsequential, because then we are not needed, right? That said, I think a lot of the efficiencies or a lot of the potential impact of AI on humans is, I think, overblown. See, at the end of the day, if you look at all the models currently, yes, they're very good at performing on or generating content or information on what it has been trained on, but not so good on things it hasn't been trained on, right? That's very evident with all the models. It's also reached a stage where I think going forward, execution is not going to be that important as ideation. And that's where almost always human progress has been dependent on ideation, right? There are ideas, and then of course and we have been sometimes constrained by execution. If you look at our history, modern history, or even before that, our constraints have always been execution, whether it's a lack of population, lack of labor, in this case, it might turn out that AI takes care of a lot of execution which could have otherwise been a bottleneck to really innovative ideas, which humans come up with. Now, again, as I said earlier, with super intelligence, part and sometimes the worst part is we don't know. It might be an ideation tool also. I don't know today. What happens a month later, we don't know.
I clearly think that, you're maybe more optimistic than I am.
Yeah, I'm very
I'm reading the
optimistic.
more doomsday voices of... Well, I mean, we'll come back next time to see what people make of this Jeffrey Hinton thing of inculcate a maternal instinct. And I know Karis Fisher was on that Anderson Cooper laughing and saying that's really the last quality you associate with these tech bros, tech billionaires.
I think the fact of the matter is that the danger or whatever, the impact of any technology, especially software, not hardware, software. Like in hardware, the dangers and the risks are dependent on the operators. Right?
Yeah.
If you're operating a vehicle, it is a fatal technology, it's a tool, but it depends on who's operating it. In this case, in software, it's, I think, dependent on the people generating it. That the people who are going to birth it have to have these instincts, as you said.
Yeah, which they don't. But we've seen with social media already. I think that they don't. I think
Social media might be a case of not ignorance, but ignoring the risks.
But
In this case, I think risks are becoming evident every day. It's too early. You can say it's been around. So mass AI usage has been around since 2022, so 3 years. Really, it's been over the last year and a half that people have honed their skills on this and then started using it for commercial applications, for even investment as an investment kind of tool, platform, whatever you call it. Now, as I said, if it is helping corporations, people, individuals becoming more efficient, I think that's a good thing, always. Machines helped us do that. Computers helped us do that. Along with the problems of gaming, gambling, etc., online scams, they're all part of the same internet, right? Would any of us say we would be better off without the internet or digital connections?
I think there are some, there's some differences there.
There's a part of that internet.
Well, yes, and certain waves of this revolution. I think we'll come to that the next time. For the moment, though, any thoughts from you on who you'd like to see next on the podcast or any episodes you've enjoyed?
No, I've enjoyed. I like to be surprised by so I would want to know who's the 50th guest.
No pressure. Maybe it'll be you. Maybe I'll come back to you. I think, is there anything right now in the space of AI, in a couple of sentences for the moment, that you're excited to watch out for from India when it comes to innovation?
I'm eagerly tracking, how we are moving towards AGI. But what I've seen in the last maybe last year or so, is I've seen models settle into different areas of expertise, right? So a model A is good at coding, model B is good at something else. So I think that's very interesting as to instead of being this constant hyper competitive space, different models are finding their different niches. Not exactly niches, but different spaces where they dominate. And I think that's interesting. Because it's because the enterprise applications of AI we're just seeing them now. The last
any interesting innovation from India that you've seen or you're looking at?
I'm following a lot of them. In fact, a lot of young, very bright people are working on some very cool things, but we'll wait for them to come out and grab attention. And I think that will be interesting. I think because India has a certain disadvantage because as we know now, this is,
Resource intensive.
this is a high capex game, right? And India in general we are not very good at investing large amounts of capex without immediate returns, and this is not that. You have to invest for a period of time on technologies and resources that are very resource intensive, and you don't get the benefit immediately. So I think that we are constrained on, but what we're not constrained on is human capital, right? The real, as someone said to me a few days ago, the sheer weight of our brain horsepower of this country.
We have just been outsourcing it right now. The time is now to actually use that domestically to maybe innovate and come up with ways of catching up without having to spend, say, $100 billion a year. Right?
Yeah.
It's happening in the West. Because that is unsustainable for any economy or any geography except. So I don't see it anywhere.
For the moment, thank you so much for joining us for this new segment, which is to demystify. And we'll be back with Abhishek soon. Thank you for opening your living room up to me, your co-host. Thanks.